Imagine you are a farmer in Kansas in 1873. You have never left your county. But one morning, something arrives at the edge of your land. A line of iron, driven into the earth by 10,000 men you will never meet, stretching from a city on the Atlantic coast to another on the Pacific. The railroad. You didn't ask for it. You didn't pay for it. Not directly. But it will determine what your grain is worth, what you can buy, and who you can become. This is not a story about railroads. It is a story about a recurring mechanism, an economic pattern that has played out at least 4 times in history, each time in a different medium, each time arriving at the same destination. The mechanism is this: democratic societies collectively pay to unlock a new dimension of the physical world, absorb the catastrophic risks of the opening, and then, at the precise moment the frontier becomes a business, transfer it into private hands. The farmer in Kansas was living inside Act 3 of that mechanism. Today, we are about to watch Act 3 again. The medium this time is space. Act 1 is always the same. It requires a state. When the Transcontinental Railroad was proposed in the 1860s, no private investor on Earth would finance it. The terrain was impossible. The return was speculative. The timelines were generational. So Congress passed the Pacific Railway Act of 1862 and handed Union Pacific and Central Pacific more than 175 million acres of American public land, a territory larger than the state of Texas, plus federal loans of up to $48,000 for every mile of track laid across the mountains. 60 years later, the same logic governed the sky. In 1918, the United States Post Office began flying mail with Army pilots. 12 of those pilots died in 1920 alone. The routes were dangerous. The aircraft were primitive. No commercial airline would have launched on the odds available. So the government flew the mail, absorbed the deaths, learned what the sky would and would not allow, and built a navigational infrastructure across the continent. Radio beacons, lighted landing fields, weather reporting stations. It created the market before the market existed. And 60 years after that, the same logic governed the digital layer of the world. DARPA built ARPANET in 1969. The National Science Foundation built NSFNet, the backbone of the modern internet, and ran it for 9 years at a cost of $200 million. When AT&T was approached in the early days and offered the network outright, they declined. There was, they said, no viable business model. So the government kept building what AT&T could not imagine. Each time, a technology too expensive, too uncertain, too important to wait for market forces. Each time, the state as the first investor, accepting losses that would ruin a private firm. Act 2 is a handover. It is rarely clean. Congress passed the Kelly Act in 1925, transferring airmail routes to private contractors. Almost immediately, 3 companies, the predecessors of United, American, and TWA, used their government contracts to consolidate the industry. The Postmaster General convened what became known as the Spoils Conference of 1930, distributing the nation's air routes among the incumbents in closed sessions. A congressional investigation followed. Scandal. But here is what history preserved. By 1932, in the worst year of the Great Depression, with unemployment at 25%, the American airline industry was the single sector of the economy posting steady growth. The subsidy had worked, even if the handover was messy. The internet's handover was quieter and stranger. In April 1995, the NSF shut down the NSFNET backbone and transferred it to private internet service providers. No ceremony, no reckoning. Within 5 years, the market capitalization of internet companies would reach the trillions. AT&T, which had refused to see the business model, spent the next decade trying to buy its way back in. In both cases, the handover moment has a precise, recognizable quality. It is the moment when the frontier stops being uncertain and becomes, to the careful observer, obviously valuable. That is the moment private capital arrives, not to take the risk, but to harvest the de-risked asset. Act 3 is where you are standing right now. In 2006, NASA launched the Commercial Orbital Transportation Services Program, a structural departure from everything the agency had done before. Rather than designing rockets itself and contracting manufacturers to build them, NASA would pay young companies to develop their own vehicles, own their own intellectual property, and sell services back to the government at a fixed price. It was, in its architecture, the Kelly Act restated in rocket fuel. The government provided guaranteed revenue. The companies provided the technological risk. What followed was not a single company's story, but the birth of a whole new industry. Across the next decade, a cohort of firms began attacking the same problem from different directions. SpaceX developed reusable orbital rockets, reducing the cost of reaching low Earth orbit by a factor of 20. Rocket Lab built the Electron, proving that a small, dedicated Uber for space made more economic sense for tiny satellites than waiting years to hitchhike on a massive, expensive rocket going to the wrong destination. Sierra Nevada developed a reusable spaceplane. Blue Origin spent billions to build a massive space freight system that's meant to last forever, rather than just trying to get there fast. Each of these companies was shaped, at critical moments, by public money. NASA's Commercial Crew Program, which restored American human spaceflight capability after the Space Shuttle's retirement, invested $6.2 billion across Boeing and SpaceX, the cheapest human spaceflight development effort the agency had run since the 1960s. The National Reconnaissance Office, the Space Force, and the Department of Defense together spent tens of billions contracting launches, satellites, and communications infrastructure that underwrote the business models of nearly every serious player in the sector. The government did not build the industry, but it was the floor beneath every balance sheet. By the mid-2020s, the results are measurable. Launch costs that once made a satellite constellation an exclusively governmental ambition are now accessible to a startup. Planet Labs flies hundreds of Earth imaging satellites and sells daily photographs of the entire planet's surface to agricultural companies, insurance firms, and intelligence agencies alike. Starlink serves more than 10 million internet subscribers across the world's most remote geography. Axiom Space is constructing the first privately owned orbital station, intended to succeed the International Space Station when NASA decommissions it, a transition that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. In 2024, the global commercial space economy exceeded $600 billion in annual revenue for the first time. The companies leading this industry are now preparing, one by one, to meet public markets via IPO. Valuations that once seemed speculative are now being tested against actual revenue, actual contracts, actual infrastructure in orbit. The business model is no longer being proven. It has been proven. The frontier, which 20 years ago required a government to hold the loss, is becoming, visibly and rapidly, a place where private capital expects a return. This is the precise moment when Act 3 usually ends. Act 4 has not happened yet, but it always comes. After the railroads went public, something followed that the boosters had not advertised: natural monopoly. A railroad owns the land it sits on. There is no second track to choose from. This meant the farmer in Kansas had to pay whatever price the railroad demanded just to move his grain. By 1887, people were so frustrated that the government had to step in and create the first ever federal rules for business. The tracks used for trade had become a tool for power. We saw the same thing happen with the internet. It started as a public project where everyone collaborated. But once it was privatized, a few massive companies took over the pipes and the platforms. Even AT&T, which originally said the internet had no future, eventually bought its way back in to rebuild the very monopoly the government had once broken apart. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it follows the same patterns. Every new frontier, the American West, the sky, the internet, and now space, starts with a public scaffold. Governments take the first step not because they are better at business, but because the risks are too high for anyone else. Private companies can't afford to lose money for 20 years while waiting for a breakthrough. Only a government can carry that weight. But a scaffold is not the final building. Once a technology is proven to work and starts making money, the scaffold is taken down. The project is handed over to private business. Space is just the newest chapter in this story. The technology has changed, but the question remains the same. Once the government hands over the keys, will this new frontier be a private asset for a few, or a shared utility for everyone? The farmer is still in Kansas, but today he is looking up, not out. A new architecture is being woven across the stars, following the same logic that once laid the tracks at the edge of his field. Somewhere, 1,000 miles away, the price of the future is being set by the same system that once set the price of the grain.